Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. I want you to imagine this scenario. You are an alum at your college, and you are coming back to your school because it's the school's homecoming game. Homecoming weekend is great so far, as there's lots of activities, and you get to catch up with your old classmates and remember what it was like when you were a student here. And now, you're getting ready for the big football game, where thousands upon thousands of people will gather to watch the top athletes at the school compete against another school's top athletes in a game that has major implications on the outcome of the season. You're in the stadium, sitting in your seat, eagerly awaiting the game to kick off, and hoping that your team can come away with a victory, ending homecoming weekend on an incredibly high note. And then, roughly half an hour before the game kicks off, it gets canceled. Seriously. And I don't mean that it got canceled because of bad weather that made it too unsafe to play, because that can happen, and that is completely out of the school's control. I mean a game got canceled because something happened inside the stadium, and every attempt to play the game failed. You came back to school for the homecoming game, and you're leaving school without having watched the homecoming game. Seems rather bizarre, right? Well, for the fans at Spartan Stadium at San Jose State in 1999, that's exactly what happened. Because their homecoming game against SMU got canceled right before kickoff, and got canceled for the strangest of reasons, with all the hard work and preparation for this game being all for nothing. And this is the story behind the strangest cancellation of the entire 1999 season, and what has to be, without a doubt, the worst homecoming game in college football history. Before I talk about the actual game in question, or rather, the game that never got played, we need some context to understand the importance of what this game would have been, as well as how both teams were faring heading into this one. It's October 23rd, 1999, and we have a conference matchup in the WAC between the Spartans of San Jose State and the Mustangs of SMU. Aside from the aforementioned reason of this being the big homecoming game, this was a very big game for San Jose State as they looked to potentially make it to a bowl game. For SMU, their season was pretty much toast, barring one of the greatest single-season turnarounds in college football history, as they started off 0-5 and entered this game with just one win under their belt, having next to no room for error. But for San Jose State, oh man, this game was huge, because their bowl eligibility hopes were still very much alive. The Spartans hadn't finished the season with a winning record since 1991, and hadn't made a bowl game since they made the California Raisin Bowl in 1990. But it looked like they had a shot to at least finish at 500 or better and put themselves in the picture. Entering this game, the Spartans were 3-4, so a win here would get them back to 500. Granted, they needed a bounce-back game pretty badly, as in their last two games, which were on the road against TCU and Rice, they lost by a combined score of 91-7. But this game against the slumping SMU team, and this game, which was their first home game in a month, and was a place where they were 2-0 already this season, on the surface, things look like they could be very promising. In other words, win this game against SMU, and not only are you sending the fans home happy on homecoming weekend, but you've got a shot at your best season in nearly a decade, and maybe even a bowl game if all the cards fell in order. And not only was this a huge game because it was homecoming, and because of the bowl stakes, and not only was this huge because WAC Commissioner Carl Benson was in attendance and was on hand to watch this game unfold, but because for San Jose State, a team that had not traditionally drawn great crowds, they were expecting their largest crowd of the season, by far. The Spartans had played just 2 home games thus far in 1999, and both of those games against St. Mary's and Tulsa drew somewhere in the ballpark of 12,000 people. But for this game against SMU, flip the 2 and the 1 around, because for this game, try 21,000. The crowd was going to be electric on this night as the Spartans looked to get back to 500 and played their first home game in a month, with the school receiving a good chunk of revenue in the process. With that, we know the stakes. We know what's on the line. It's time to play some football. Or at least, in a normal world, it would be time to play some football. Everything starts out alright, with the two teams arriving at the facility without incident, and with the two teams going through their usual pregame routine to get ready for the game. Heck, even an hour before the game, there was no one in their right mind that is suspecting what is about to happen, as this game is scheduled to go on as planned, just like every other game. The game was going to kick off at 6 o'clock, highlighting the homecoming weekend. But then, at 5:15, just 45 minutes before kickoff, everything went haywire. Because 45 minutes before, behind one of the concession stands at the stadium, a transformer exploded and caught fire. The good news with this was that no one got hurt, and the firefighters arrived on the scene very quickly and put out the fire. The bad news, however, was that this was not the end of the damage caused. Fans nearby who witnessed the explosion said that it sounded like a cannon firing, and was incredibly loud and scary. And because this transformer exploded, all of the power at Spartan Stadium went out. There was no electricity throughout the venue, which, as you can expect, is a pretty big deal, especially for a night game, where you absolutely need lights to be able to see the ball. Obviously, the game could not go on as planned for 6 o'clock. You needed to get electricity into the stadium to play the game. Now, there were a few options. Option 1 was to keep the game that night and bring in generators to light the field. In theory, this seemed like a good idea. However, there was one small problem with this. When San Jose State officials contacted PG&E to inquire about getting generators for this moment, PG&E said that this process, in the absolute best case scenario, would take 8 to 10 hours. This meant that in the absolute best case scenario, this game would start somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning, which is obviously not going to happen. So the generator idea was out. Option 2 was to move the game to Sunday afternoon. Yes, attendance would not be as great, since this is an NFL Sunday, and since you imagine a lot of alums came for Saturday and weren't going to be there on Sunday. But we've seen games take place on Sunday before, when emergencies forced it to be postponed from Saturday. Plus, you wouldn't necessarily need the generators due to the game taking place in broad daylight. And if you did, the generators had plenty of time to be installed and be brought over. And in theory, this idea also sounded fine, even if it was not ideal to move the game back a day. But there was a problem with this one. SMU, as the road team, was set to fly back to Dallas after the game. They had flights on Saturday booked at 11:30 p.m. And there was no guarantee that they could fly back on Sunday after the game, because by the looks of it, all of the flights from San Jose to Dallas were sold out. If the game got moved from Saturday to Sunday, then SMU would have been stranded in San Jose, and either would have been forced to drive, which is not even the slightest bit practical since they didn't bring buses, and since it is a 25-hour bus ride, or they would have had to scramble to find a flight leaving on Monday, which is no guarantee. SMU was going to have to leave San Jose as scheduled on their 11:30 flight that Saturday, because the flight situation for them was incredibly rocky. With that, the two options presented of waiting for generators to come and moving the game to Sunday were thrown out the window. And at that moment, it became incredibly apparent as to what was unfortunately going to happen. This homecoming game was not going to be played. So the commissioner of the WAC, Carl Benson, and the officials from both schools tried to figure out when this game could get moved to. The logical date, and quite frankly the only date, was December 4th, a month and a half away, since that was the first week that both teams had an open date. However, this date posed a few problems as well. Number 1, Spartan Stadium was completely booked on that day. San Jose State was named the host for the 1999 Women's College Cup, the Final Four for women's college soccer, and that was taking place on the weekend of December 4th. This meant that you couldn't play the game at Spartan Stadium. It's always a good sign when San Jose State Athletic Director Chuck Bell flat out said on the game that he would have no idea where it would be played. And number 2, if you move the game to December 4th, that's the final week of the season. And if it doesn't mean anything to either side, then what's the point? Yeah, it would be nice to play one more game, but if neither San Jose State nor SMU can become bowl eligible, or compete for the conference title for it, then is it really worth it? Is it really worth the hassle of trying to find a stadium since you can't use Spartan Stadium and paying money for rent on that, and then having SMU travel all the way to California, all for a game that means nothing whatsoever? From a financial standpoint, it definitely does not make sense. So the game got moved to that December 4th date, but on the condition that the game had to mean something for either one of those teams. If the game was not necessary for either side to become bowl eligible, then it would be called off for good. Spoiler alert, the game was called off. 3-4 San Jose State was unable to win 2 of their next 3, and 1-5 SMU was unable to go on a 4-game winning streak. So the game was just not held, period, making this one of the craziest sagas regarding the scheduling of a game of all time, and definitely of the 1999 season. And to say that San Jose State was disappointed by this would be a massive understatement. This was supposed to be their homecoming game. This game was supposed to bring in $65,000 in revenue at least. This was supposed to be a bounce-back game in front of their largest crowd of the season, and one of their largest crowds ever at the time. And it was called off just moments before kickoff because of one faulty transformer? Yeah, that didn't sit well with people. Head coach Dave Baldwin said, "It's a nightmare. The football gods are not smiling on us." Senior quarterback Chris Kastler was incredibly disappointed that he wasn't going to have a homecoming game, saying, "I'm a senior, and your senior homecoming game is supposed to be a big deal. This is just a huge letdown. You get all pumped up to play all week, and then something like this happens. It's indescribable." And even if athletic director Chuck Bell tried to lighten the mood a little bit, he could not truly hide his frustration, saying, "It was one of those weird times in history. It's one of the most memorable games never played. You cannot repeat homecoming." This game, because of the faulty transformer, the inability to get generators in time, the inability of SMU to find any flights leaving on Sunday, the inability of San Jose State to find a new stadium, and the inability of either team to play well on the field, was the first time in the history of the WAC that a game had been canceled, and was the first time ever that San Jose State canceled the game for non-wartime related reasons. Think of everything that had to go wrong for this game to not be played. It was almost a perfect storm. Literally 45 minutes before the game, no one was suspecting a thing, and not a single person in the stadium had a feeling that the game was going to be called off. However, I'm sure for all San Jose State players, coaches, fans, and alums who attended Spartan Stadium on this October day in 1999 to celebrate homecoming weekend, that to end the 1990s, and in the final homecoming of the millennium, that this night, and this game that never happened, was a homecoming that they will never forget. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.